Hello again, everyone. My name is David Bastel alongside David Oikel, and this is the Real Estate Edition podcast. It is cottage season across Ontario, and what better guest to have on the program than Michelle Kelly, editor of Cottage Life Magazine and the host of the Cottage Life podcast. David, cottage real estate across the province continues to be hot property.
You're absolutely right, Dave. I mean, we've heard a lot about lack of supply of real estate around the province, and maybe never more so than for cottages. People want to get out of the city, need more space, spread out over the last year and a half. They're able to work from the cottage. So demand for cottages has never been higher. And lots of things to talk about, and Michelle will take us through all of those things.
And before we get to our conversation with Michelle, be sure to subscribe to the Real Estate Edition podcast wherever you're listening. Now, here's our chat with Michelle Kelly.
You're listening to this month's episode of The Real Estate Edition with host Dave Bastel and AREA President David Oikel.
For our new listeners, this is Michelle's fourth time on the Real Estate Edition podcast. It's awesome talking to you once again, Michelle. And for anybody that doesn't know who you are, can you kind of explain your position at Cottage Life and a little bit about yourself as well?
Yes. Thanks for having me on, first of all, Dave. I appreciate you guys, giving profile to the magazine, to the brand, and just chatting about cottage real estate, which is, going through an unbelievable time right now. For people who don't know me, I am the editor at Cottage Life, and I oversee the magazine content and the cottagelife.com, our social media. I'm the host of the Cottage Life podcast, which we're in season 2 of. We're about to release season 2 on June 30th and have a new episode out every week this summer. And I'm involved with doing some live events at the Cottage Life shows, which we have 4 across the country each year, and work a little bit with the folks on Cottage Life Television as well. So I've been with the brand for more than 20 years, and it's definitely something. Cottaging really runs deep for me. I grew up going to a cottage in Eastern Ontario, and my family sold that cottage about 10 years ago. But since then, I've been renting mostly over on Lake Huron, which is a completely different experience, but wonderful. And I'm sort of a diehard cottager. It doesn't feel like summer until I've dipped my toe in one of the lakes in Ontario, for sure. So that's a little bit about me.
That's fantastic, Michelle. I'm in Eastern Ontario. I'm in Ottawa. So what lake were you on over here?
Oh, nice. So my mother is actually from Westport, Ontario,
Yes.
And I still have lots. She's a big Irish family, and I have tons of family still in the area. And we were on the Upper Rideau Lake.
Yeah.
Until 2010, I think was when we saw 2010 or 2011. I'm sorry. So this is our 10th summer at the cottage. So yeah, I love that area. It's kind of a hidden gem in my mind a little bit, having grown up in Toronto, because very few people go that far east. But if you live in Ottawa, wow, you're so lucky. You're right on the doorstep of the Rideau, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's certainly. I helped a client buy a property on Upper Rideau recently, and I think a bunch of Toronto buyers have found it because we had to compete pretty hard for the property. So,
is that right? Oh, yeah, well, I suspect my family is probably part of that, because we ended up selling to a few friends there. But yes, it's a great lake. It's a great lake.
So, what's your favorite part about going to a cottage?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, it's funny for me because it's my work as well as something that I, would choose to do regardless of work. So it's a little bit difficult for me to switch my brain off when I get there, which is funny because most people, that's what they like, is they like the fact that they go and it's a complete escape. That's what I hear so often. It's an escape from my everyday life. And for me, ultimately, that's what it is too, and just being able to be somewhere away from the, general busyness of life. Being able to be on a lake, there's something so restorative for me about looking out over a lake and watching the sunset with a drink in hand, and all that stuff sounds like a cliche, but like the truth is it really does get into your bones, and you start to really feel your shoulders come down. And so, I love that about the cottage. And I love also, not just the proximity to nature, but the time that you can spend with your family. I think, for me, that's a big deal. And watching my kids do all the things that I did when I was little, and taking such joy in simple pleasures, playing in the waves, and it's little stuff, getting an ice cream in town at the end of the day, all that stuff that they really love is a really, it's just a wonderful tradition, and I love being able to take my kids there and have them experience the same things that I did when I was little. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it certainly is. And the cottage country life, the market itself, as we all know, is extremely popular right now, maybe even at the highest peak we've ever seen it in our lifetime. I've even read that cottage country sales last winter alone were up 30% from the same time the year before. What are your thoughts of the influx of people that are looking to buy a cottage, and what are you hearing?
Yeah, so I think it's great. I think it's great. The more people who can enjoy it, I think, it's part of the Canadian cultural fabric to enjoy the great outdoors in the wilderness. And we have so much of it here. We're so blessed in that way. And I think it's great when more people can enjoy it. And I think, cottages have often been referred to as sort of bastions of privilege and places where, you have to have a lot of money to get in. And I think that this recent explosion is perhaps accelerating that to some extent. But on the other hand, we're also seeing all sorts of trends that actually make it more accessible to more people. The amount of people that I hear from who, share a cottage, they buy a cottage with family members or with friends, and they're able to, afford it because of that. Or, another huge trend are young people buying cottages before they're buying houses in the city, the skip the house, buy the cottage trend, which is allowing people who it's not, they're not mega privileged people in the sense they have lots of money to buy a second property. They're choosing to prioritize a recreational property and perhaps renting in the city. And then another trend too, which I think is just all mixed up in all of the, just the explosion of cottaging in general, is the explosion of cottage renting. Mm-hmm. Something of a fraught topic in that there are problems, I think, in the minds of, cottagers who own, that people are coming and overusing the lakes, or they're not respecting sort of the norms of being quiet or respecting the environment when they come and rent. But on the other hand, I do also think that that's a pretty small proportion of people, and in general, cottage renters, of whom I am one. They love the cottage, and they do respect the norms that are set within specific cottage areas of, around safety and etiquette and whatnot. And I think, again, it's renting is fantastic because it gives people access to the wilderness that perhaps would not be able to buy. And it's their opportunity for everyone to come and, enjoy time on the lakes, which I think, again, is a really important part about being Canadian in my mind. So I think that I've had a lot of emails from people, friends of mine even, should I buy this cottage? Should I buy this cottage? And it kind of blows my mind. Some of them, it's like the amount that they're being offered at, like, feels like last summer it would have been half as much.
Yeah.
And I've heard bonker stories about, empty lots, east facing for $1 million and all this kind of stuff that, it really does spin my head a little bit. And I think I'll be interested to see over the next sort of 12 months, or the next, once we get through this summer and we go into next year, to see if, a lot of people, I think, bought cottages to stay at during the pandemic. And now that the pandemic hopefully is coming to a conclusion, will they stick with cottaging now that they can, go on broader vacations? Will we have, a glut of listings? I mean, that seems unlikely given how high demand is, but it will be interesting to see if all of those people sort of choose to exit the market in the same way that they entered the market so quickly in, this time last year. So, there's lots of stuff going on, more than, as you just said, really in my lifetime, and in certainly my time working on Cottage Life, more than I can ever recall, how many trends are sort of intersecting at this moment, for sure.
It's interesting, the renting element. My client rented on two lakes last year, rented on Charleston Lake and Upper Rideau, and Big Rideau, and said, that's the one I want to buy on. So they used it as an opportunity to try out the lake in his mind to figure out where he wanted to buy. So lots of opportunities for that. Yeah. So turning to those looking to buy their first cottage, I know some prospective buyers can get overwhelmed, like buying their first home, and don't know where to start when they begin their cottage hunt. You mentioned this on your website, but what are some of the big questions that first-time cottage buyers should ask their realtors?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, buying a cottage is not like buying a city home. There's a lot of differences. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think the main ones really are septic system. That's a big thing.
Yep.
You know, you're in the city, you're used to being on municipal water, municipal sewer, and it's, you know, you don't even think about it. At the cottage, if you're not thinking about it, you're sooner or later going to have a very big problem if you're not thinking about your septic system, for example. You know, and it goes hand in hand a little bit with that is your water source. You know, are you getting your water from the lake? Are you getting it from a well? How do you manage and maintain both of those sources? Really important. And things you may not think about, and not just think about, you know, whether or not they exist, but think about when you're purchasing. You know, this is why it's so important to use a local realtor. You really do have to rely on your realtor to tell you, you know, what are the questions? If so, yeah, there's a septic system, but what do I ask about the septic system? Like how old it is? Do I inspect the septic bed? Do I need a separate inspection for the septic system? So all that kind of stuff that you really may not have any idea about, you should definitely be relying on your realtor for that kind of information. And another thing I think that's, you know, a very 2020, 2021 problem or sort of consideration is Wi-Fi. You know, I've heard stories, a horror story, in fact, about a young woman from Toronto who first-time property buyer bought a place in Prince Edward County at the beginning of the pandemic when, you know, it became apparent she would be working from home for quite some time. So she bought a place sight unseen because properties were just going like hotcakes in that area. She finally gets out there, she moves in, she goes to set up her internet, and she realizes she cannot get the internet. So that sort of changes her plan on how to work from home. So again, those are the questions, like that's a big deal. If you're buying a cottage intending to use it as your office and you cannot get online, you know, I think the problem is pretty obvious. So that's the kind of thing that I think is really important that, you know, you really consider with a cottage, and, you know, those are the differences, the sort of the top differences I would suggest too. And there's another one too that I mention to people all the time who are buying, is to make sure they know what it's like in all seasons. So if you buy in summer and there's lots of leaves on the trees, for example, and you're going to live there all year round or choose to use it all year round, are you okay with how close you seem to your neighbors once all the leaves fall off the trees? Little stuff like that, I think you need to be really aware of. And again, not stuff that you think about in the city at all. So, you know, start with what are the differences with the cottage property and like really drill into those. And when you're making your purchasing decisions, I think that's key.
Yeah, you kind of touched on some of that. So like continuing on that, what are some of the features buyers should look to avoid? Is there a list of those things as well, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously really personal, right? Because what people look for in a cottage is different, right? So I might really like fishing. So it's pretty great for me that I'm in a shallow, weedy lake because lots of fish are there. If I'm a cottager who really likes swimming, I don't like that lake, you know? So it's really personal, like what you like. I think some things that I would personally caution against, and this is again on that same thing I was talking about with the neighbors just now, is the neighbors. You know, if you're living somewhere at a cottage and you don't like your neighbors, like that's a big deal. And it's a big deal for a lot of reasons. For one, they can really impede, you know, maybe they're all night partiers and you just want to go bird watching. Well, those two things don't mix so well, right? So it does pay to do a little bit of investigation around that, because people tend to get to their cottage and live pretty large and free. And if you're not interested, it's not like the city, right? You can't just close your door and shut out the world to the same extent. So your neighbors are really important. So that's one thing. I would say another super important thing that you can't change is your view. You know, I often say to people, you can buy a cottage that's falling down, and if it has if you like the sunset and has a beautiful western view, and you're going to spend every single day with your back to that falling down cottage while you appreciate the sunset, well, you can fix the cottage. You cannot fix the sunset. You can't move the sunset, right? So, you know, that to me is an absolute deal breaker. If that's something that you're really committed to, you know, your view and what you're looking out over is incredibly important because it's not changeable. So to me, those are really the key things: neighbors and view. And I mean, and then there's the most obvious things like location, of course. Like, do you want to be on an island? Do you want to be on main property? I think island properties seem really attractive to a lot of people because, you know, it's your own little island away from it all. But maybe not as great on Friday night when you just fought the traffic and you're trying to get a load of groceries and kids and bags and all that junk into the cottage, and it's pouring rain, and you know, you're in a boat going across a busy lake. And so, you know, you just have to be thinking through that kind of stuff. Yeah.
It's interesting about thinking about the summer versus winter. You know, when we, again, purchased this cottage, it was like, asked the realtor, I said, who maintains the road in the winter? Because we knew we could see the full-time folks who were along there, and they said, Bob plows it. I said, can I get some more details on Bob and the financial arrangements? Because, because my client plans on being there all year round. And so all the details about how life works, 12 months of the year is certainly important. So that's a good one. So continuing on that. So what are you hearing people are looking for in a cottage recreational property this year? You mentioned Wi-Fi before. Mm-hmm. What else are people thinking about that are becoming hot topics this year?
Yeah, I mean, Wi-Fi, of course, that's massive for sure. I mean, we just discussed that for obvious reasons with our new work from home culture. Wi-Fi is really important. I think the other things that people are thinking differently about now than they have before, and it does have to do with having a more flexible work schedule and working from home is your commute times. So traditionally it's been the further you are from major centers, the less expensive mostly cottages are going to be, because your commute's going to be longer and the traffic is bad and all of that stuff. I think now that people are having more flexible work schedules, to me, the commute is a different thing. People might be willing to consider a cottage that's a little bit further afield because their commute, they can leave at off-peak times for traffic. So, what might be a Friday 5 o'clock commute of 4 hours might just be 2.5 if you take the traffic out, right? So I think that's kind of making a difference to people, is that they're able to buy in areas where the traffic isn't as much as a bother. I think too, another big thing, people are thinking about the cottage as a full-time residence more than ever. And maybe if they have a family, maybe having their kids there even. So what are the schools like? How long does it take to get to them? It's still a recreational property, but they're using it as a full-time home, maybe with a small place in the city or maybe no place in the city at all. So that's a difference I would say is important nowadays. And I think too, as we see, this is a trend that was really in full swing before the pandemic began, but is now even more important with the pandemic, is, how close are you to services? Do you need to be near a hospital? And I think that's really important for people because they're thinking as they age, they want to be able to get to a hospital quickly if they need it. Or, in a global pandemic, I think we all realize the importance of being close to access to care if we needed it, if something like that happens. So I think it's just a sort of more on people's minds than it used to be, having access. Or the flip side of that is, people, because of the pandemic, wanting to really be isolated in a way and having a spot where they can go to when everything goes pear-shaped. I think there is an element of that as well, which, of course not for everyone, but it's something that people maybe think now more than ever. So a lot of sort of opposing trends in a sense.
Yeah, continuing on that, I mean, I think that, in the past, up until a year and a half ago, it might have been, I want to go away to unplug. And then we saw, well, now I can work from there. So now I got to plug in as well as unplug. And now with prices being what they are, I mean, maybe it's a little more difficult to find an exclusively place just to unplug. And so it's probably a combination of both now in many markets. Or what do you think? Is that true, that it's probably a multifaceted place now? Is it for both purposes now?
Yeah, it's so funny you asked me that question. 2 or 3 years ago, I remember saying to a lot of people, like, I wonder if what will happen is that it will be it'll be a really attractive thing to be in a Wi-Fi hole, like to be somewhere where you can't get coverage, that it's actually a selling point. Because people are so addicted to being connected all the time, and frankly are getting tired, and burning out. So having a place where you don't even have the option of going online is maybe the cure that some people need. And I used to say that, I wonder if places that don't have any connectivity will actually be more in demand. And then, of course, something happens that I never would have predicted in a million years, which is that, suddenly we'd be working from home for a year and a half plus. And that sort of turns that idea on its head. But I think it's the problem of being, addicted to your Wi-Fi, as so many of us are. I think it exists at the cottage the same way it exists anywhere else, and I think it's a whole other topic, really talking about how people use their cottages as a place to either distance themselves from that or feel like they really need to have it because they are isolated. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I don't really have the answer to that question, but it is certainly something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, definitely is. So do you find the traditional cottage country life, cottage country area expanding because of this demand? We know like certain places like Muskoka or the Kawarthas are desirable because they're close to Toronto, but are people looking for something more affordable that, are they venturing out to find this? Are there hotspots, Michelle, that there's, people don't mind the 4 or 5 hour drive rather than, it's close to Toronto, so we'll stay here, depending on where you live, of course, across the province?
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, Dave, I always get into trouble when I answer this question because then I say in a specific area and the people in that area say, don't tell anyone. We don't want people to know about us.
The secret spot, sure. Michelle, tell us.
Yeah, the secret. I mean, I think you hit on it there when you said, the distance from town, by town, I mean Toronto, from Ottawa, from major centers.
Exactly.
Is really the and I think that, again, it's a lot more attractive to Cottage and Bancroft if you live in downtown Toronto now when you can leave Thursday at 11 a.m. Than it would be if you knew you were going to sit in traffic for 2 hours Friday at 5. So I think that has really opened up, opened the eyes of potential buyers in major centers because they are able to think about traveling more. It's not as onerous perhaps as it was pre-pandemic even.
Yep.
And I think too, the fact is many of those more traditional areas, Muskoka, Kawarthas, I sort of think Muskoka, Kawarthas, Haliburton, Georgian Bay, like they're pricey. They're very pricey. And while there are still deals, of course, within those areas, people think of Muskoka as being, huge mansions on Lake Grasso. And while of course that element exists for sure, there's also many smaller lakes there with more simple places that are certainly more affordable than those big 3 lakes. So I think it's really just a matter of like looking around and being really clear about your budget, all the same things anyone buying any piece of real estate should be on top of. But I think, all the demand is probably driving up prices more than anything really. And that demand exists all over Ontario, not just, Muskoka, Kawarthas, Georgian Bay and Haliburton.
So do you, moving into 2021 and the summer's basically been here for the last couple of months, do you find, or do you see people maybe staying away from beach towns like Grand Bend or Wasaga to avoid the packed shores? Can you see that as somewhat of a trend to, I don't want to go there because it's simply too busy, Michelle?
Right. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, just speaking personally, I'll give you a personal anecdote. I am renting a cottage next weekend because we were supposed to travel out west, my family, and we canceled that trip because of the pandemic, and we're going to go to a cottage on the Bruce Peninsula, and it's sort of near Sauble Beach, and I don't really want to go to Sauble Beach for the reason you just said. I live downtown in Toronto. I don't want to be around people anymore. I need a break. And I think we're so acutely aware of that because of COVID, of how close we are to people, right? So I think but again, that's a personal thing. It depends. A lot of people really miss Wasaga Beach. They miss going there and being in kind of a scene that's like a fun beach town. And they want that because they haven't had it for so long because of the pandemic. So again, it's kind of a personal thing and just thinking about what you want. I think an issue on that Western Shore more than anything, and sort of the Grand Bend, crowded beach, Wasaga, is something that's been an issue for the last couple of years, which is water levels. The water has been incredibly high and eating up a lot of the beach, in fact. And I think that this year I've heard that it's a bit lower, which is good news for cottagers, more beach for them to sort of frolic on. So yeah, I mean, I think there's, one trend comes and another one comes in, and I think that's a good example of that.
So, Michelle, last year we saw a lot of people initially starting to work from home, for a while, and and now that the work from home is maybe going to continue, and people are going to be expecting that it's going to be going on for a lot longer, and maybe as Wi-Fi improves, as it gets expanded, do you think more people will just consider that it's going to be a full-time thing and just decide to move to a cottage full time and maybe sell their city property? What do you think the next couple of years is going to bring?
It's a tough question. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know for sure. I think that cottaging is awesome, and I think that this pandemic has exposed a lot of people to a whole lifestyle that perhaps they hadn't considered. And I think that they're going to love it because it's nice to be able to be out in nature and to be, have your own private space, which, as the cities become more expensive and more populated is, something that is more valuable, I think, than ever before, is having that little bit of isolation in your own little piece of paradise, as you say. I think that right now the cottage market, and again, I'm certainly not as close to this as all the realtors are, but it's expensive. And I do think that it's going to be, if not already, keeping people out of the market. It's just affordability will become a bigger and bigger issue. And I think that's true in the cities. And now we're seeing that trend accelerate in cottage country too. So, as we look through this summer, it will really be interesting to see what happens. And again, if those people who bought pandemic cottages are going to keep them, or if they're going to sell them. If I had to predict either way, and again, this is just me predicting based on nothing but my intuition, is that people will love it because it's fun and they like cottages and they'll keep them. And it, I have trouble seeing the prices coming down too significantly. But again, it'll just be interesting to see. I'm certainly not, I don't want to be making predictions there because that gets you into trouble, but that's my feeling for sure.
Well, I think that, in real estate, as in anything, the laws of supply and demand are undefeated, right? I mean, that's I think right. That, and if supply doesn't increase, then and demand stays where it is, then prices will continue to go up. So
David,
because of all of that, go ahead.
I'm curious to know what you think is going to happen.
Well, I agree that, once people have them and they enjoy them, and if they could afford them before, they can afford them now and they will hold them. So I think that, and as many businesses, some people, are going to have to figure out whether they're going to be working from home, and if it becomes a permanent part of their circumstance. I mean, even where I am in Ottawa, people are saying, well, I don't have to go back to the office a lot. And then so they might not be buying on a cottage necessarily, but they're certainly in a smaller town or an hour from Ottawa where they wouldn't have even been able to contemplate that before. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a lot of that is going to have, the realities are going to be a little bit more permanent. And if they have to go in a couple of times a week, then they fight through that traffic a couple of times a week rather than five times. So, so I can't imagine if you found a good spot that you would give it up anytime soon, because I think that people are enjoying it so much. So given that, I just maybe answered my own next question, is that what's the availability of cottages going to be like on the market? I don't think I think people are going to hold on to them. Do you see something like that happening?
Yeah, I don't think, I don't think there's going to be a lot of listings. I think that we're going to continue to see, very high demand and low supply. That feels like about right, considering everything that I've seen in the last little while. Even personally, sort of having my occasional moment where I'm like, well, maybe we should buy a cottage now, and being like, well, where would we buy that cottage?
Yeah,
it's tough. I think that's going to be the big game changer.
Yeah, and just the last little bit on that is, if people do buy them, do you think that some of them their economics might be about that they would rent it for a time in order to, help with the capital cost and the operating costs?
Absolutely. That is complete. We hear this all the time. We're buying a cottage and we're not even going to use it for 20 years. We're going to rent it out every summer. Renting out your cottage is so easier than it's ever been, right? Because of these big Vrbo and Airbnb, and all sorts of other rental agencies all throughout Ontario. There's so many opportunities for that. They do the marketing for you. Even a cottage rental, we were hearing in January, there's basically no rentals left, and all of the clients that we work with have waiting lists that are hundreds long, And I think that's because a lot of people did buy, and that's again a trend that's been accelerated by the pandemic. It's been years now that this whole renting thing has sort of started taking off, and I think that it can really be a bridge for a lot of people, who get their cottage, just what you said, and then they rent it out for the short, medium term, and then perhaps they plan to retire there, or every summer they take back another week, and they have another week until they're only renting a couple of weeks to finance upkeep of their property taxes or whatever the case may be as they can afford it. So I do think that that's absolutely going to be happening more and more. And perhaps too, again, this is just conjecture, but the people who bought pandemic cottages, as I've been calling them, like maybe as they travel, they want to go abroad or they want to go to the States or wherever they're going, they can rent their places out and they can keep them because they can afford to travel and, have their vacations paid for with their rentals. So I think that's just going to, again, give more opportunities to lots of different people to access cottage country and not actually have to buy a cottage.
Yeah.
We will be back after this short break.
Join the AREA Realtor research community to have your say when it comes to the services AREA provides, the recommendations we make to the government, and the strategic priorities of the association. You'll receive exclusive content and be entered into monthly draws every time you complete a survey. Visit joinarearesearch.com to sign up and join an exclusive community of realtors making a difference. joinarearesearch.com.
So this, unfortunately, is going to be the second summer of the pandemic throughout the world, basically here. And obviously, we know about how popular the cottages were in 2020. As far as trends and accessories that go hand in hand with cottages, last year you talked about pink flamingo floaties being something that people wanted to accessorize. And you know what? If you have a cottage, are you going to invest in a boat or a kayak or a canoe or water skis or something like that? Are you seeing any sort of trend that may be beneficial to people selling these sort of projects, moving or these sort of I guess toys, I guess you can say, in a sense, toys, right?
Yeah.
Moving forward in this 2021 summer.
Well, for sure. I mean, you couldn't find a boat in Ontario last summer.
Really?
People were really into boating. It was a big deal. And I think the same thing, will happen again. Boating hasn't gotten any less fun. And all these new cottagers want boats. And I think that a lot of cottagers, not to mention, the economics of the pandemic has meant that a lot of people have access, the news this week has all been about this morning. In fact, on the radio, they were talking about how Canadians have saved a lot of money and it's just sitting in their accounts and they're just waiting to spend it because they haven't had to pay for childcare and hockey and all of the things, vacations abroad, all of that stuff. So they have a surplus of cash and they want to spend it. And everyone's sort of anticipating that this will be the summer. And I think if you're a cottager, like, boats are a good idea. They're fun and it's a way to get out on the water and enjoy. It's a great pandemic activity.
Yeah.
So I do anticipate that is going to be something that continues. Yes, for sure. And, not to mention new cottagers mean you need more of that stuff. You didn't have it before, whether whether it's a stand-up paddleboard, it's a, blow up raft, it's whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. If you got a new cottage, you want stuff for it. And so I do anticipate, I know we have the Cottage Life show every spring and every fall. And usually that's the time where we sort of get a real idea of what people are buying and what those trends are, because we have hundreds of exhibitors who come to the International Center. And, we had virtual shows this year, which, were great and gave an opportunity to our audience to come and talk to exhibitors and vendors of, all sorts of cottage products and services. And I think, as we look to the fall, we're not sure if it'll be an in-person show or not. Of course, we hope for that. But it'll be really interesting to see, like, what is the hot thing that people are buying? Like, what is it that we can't keep on the shelves? Because I think it will be something. I don't think it'll be a pink flamingo floaty. I think it'll be something a lot more substantial because people have the money for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of people having the money for it, so in the age of social distancing, are you finding consumers placing an importance of renovating boathouses to create more space, to make something bigger than what they have on their property, kind of in the spirit of social distancing, and to spread things out a little bit more? Are you seeing that sort of trend?
Yeah, that's an interesting question right now. Lumber has been so expensive the last, months. And we put out a story last week in one of our newsletters, Dockside DIY, it's all about building and renovation at the cottage. And it was about, lumber prices and are they going to come down? And we had so many responses from people saying that they're delaying projects because they don't want to pay for that, a new deck, a new fence, whatever the case may be. But your question is actually quite interesting, because another trend that is happening, and this one is actually quite separate from the pandemic, is that more cottages are multi-generational, right? So, a family, if I have siblings and our parents had a cottage, our parents are the grandparents now, and we have the little kids and they want to spend time with us, but they don't really want to spend time with us at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. So wouldn't it be great if Michelle and her kids were out in the bunkie, And I think that makes more sense, like not just because they have to be separate, but because more families are using one property.
Yes.
And I think that is very attractive for the people who maybe don't want to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, or who want to stay up later. There's lots of different variations on that theme. And I think, that again has nothing to do with the pandemic. That's just a trend in cottage ownership and having these multi-generational cottages. So that's a big thing. Although I do say, when in regards to buying a property, I think a lot of people do buy with an eye to down the road when I have a larger family and I want my kids to be here. And this is our way to stay connected to them as they age and as they grow their own families. I think it's really important, if you're buying a property with that in mind, crucially important, in fact, is that you really look into local building regulations and building codes, because sometimes you actually can't build bunkies. You don't, perhaps your property doesn't have enough setback to build anything apart from what's already there. You may not be able to build a boathouse. So again, that's something that I always say to people who are buying, like really lean on your realtor for that, who should really know what's going on in that specific lake. And what the regulations are and what you can and cannot do, because that really does vary from municipality to municipality.
Yeah, I mean, I just continuing again, my famous little purchase that I did. He wants his kids to come out, and so we had to make sure that the septic would comply, the water quantity and quality would, that he could build what he wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
and that the septic, that they wouldn't make him start over on the septic. So we did a bunch of research before he did that. So there's a bunch of questions that are good ones to ask to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that what you envision is going to be possible.
That's right.
Everything's possible with an infinite amount of time, money, and resources. But you want to make sure that and patience, and you got to know what you want to do.
Yeah.
So you talked about rentals, Michelle, and just and the long waiting list. So what's the best option